Why was everyone already betting against her before she'd even unpacked her bag? The whispers began before Corporal Elena Daniels stepped into the supply tent. $5 says she doesn't last through the field exercise. The voices came from somewhere near the equipment racks, Martinez and Williams, both watching her approach with lazy smirks that said everything words didn't have to. Laughter followed, sharp and dry like gravel under boots. The desert sun pressed down on forward operating base striker, turning every breath into heat. Dust coated the tents, the vehicles, the people, like a constant reminder that this place didn't care if you belonged here or not. Captain Reeves stood outside the command tent with his arms crossed, already prepared for disappointment. He watched her approach, as if reading a report he didn't like. "You understand you're being assigned to logistic support, right?" he said, clipboard in hand. "Medical supplies inventory, tent maintenance, that sort of thing. Nothing too demanding." His tone carried a faint offer. "If you want out, now's the time." Elena's reply was steady. "I understand, sir." He waited, as if expecting her to protest, to defend herself, to ask for more. When she didn't, he sighed and made a note on the paper. "All right then." That was the welcome, that was the start. She walked through the base like a shadow after that. People looked past her, not at her. They'd already written her story before they knew her name. Staff Sergeant Morrison found her an hour later, wiping sweat from his forehead as he came out of the medical tent. This the new logistics assignment. His tone made assignment sound like mistake. "Yes, Sergeant." He pointed. "Supply tent, that way. Manifest needs updating. Try not to mess up the count, we've got inspection coming." He didn't wait for her answer. He was already gone, already laughing with two male corpsmen, explaining some field procedure he'd done under fire. Elena stood there for a moment in the heat, then turned and walked toward the tent. Inside, the air was thick and unmoving. Wooden crates stacked in neat disorder, medical codes stamped on faded sides. She moved between them with quiet precision. Checking morphine counts. Inspecting expiration dates. Rearranging tourniquets and bandages in patterns that would make sense when seconds mattered. Her fingers moved automatically, swift, deliberate, without hesitation. Anyone watching closely would have seen it, but no one was watching. Outside, a voice drifted in through the canvas walls. "Think she knows the difference between a pressure bandage and a Band-Aid, Private Shun?" Another answered with laughter. "Probably not, but at least she can't screw up too bad in there." More laughter, then footsteps fading away. Elena didn't flinch, she kept counting. Her movements calm, measured, quiet. But inside she felt it. The weight of being underestimated, the familiar taste of it. This wasn't the first time someone had looked at her and seen less. By the time the sun started to drop, she'd finished the entire inventory. Every crate, every label, every discrepancy. At 1800 hours, she walked the manifest to the medical tent. Staff Sergeant Morrison barely looked up. He took the papers, set them on a pile, and waved her away. Behind him, the male medics were laughing around a training dummy, practicing airway procedures, joking like brothers in a world where she didn't exist. Elena turned to leave and almost collided with Lieutenant Hayes. "You're the new support assignment, right?" "Yes, sir." "Getting settled?" He asked it with the rhythm of courtesy, already glancing past her toward the others. "Yes, sir." He nodded, distracted, and moved on. No one asked how the inventory went. No one noticed the supplies had been reorganized into life-saving order. She walked back to her quarters in the darkening light. Around her, the base came alive with evening routine, soldiers laughing outside their tents, the sound of cards, guitars, low voices. Martinez and Williams were there too. "Hey, Daniels," Williams called out. "You survived your first day of counting bandages." Laughter followed. She kept walking, didn't look back, didn't answer. Someone said behind her, "Give her credit, at least she didn't quit." More laughter. The sound followed her until it faded into the wind. Morning came in a haze of dust and orders. The entire base assembled in front of the command tent, 60 soldiers standing at attention as Major Cassidy addressed them. Her voice was clipped, confident, made for command. Field exercise begins at 600 tomorrow. Live fire ranges, casualty response drills. This is not basic training. Half of you will struggle with the conditions. Some of you won't make it through day 3. Elena stood at the back, silent. In the rows ahead, Martinez leaned toward Williams. $10, says tent girl, requests rear echelon duty before we even deploy. You're on, Williams replied, grinning. She'll claim exhaustion or something. A few nearby soldiers chuckled. Elena heard it. Of course she did. She just didn't react. Major Cassidy gestured to Staff Sergeant Morrison. Brief them on medical readiness. Morrison stepped forward, confident, comfortable. We've got 4 qualified combat medics rotating through the squads: Stevens, Rodriguez, Chun, Patterson. These are your primary medical responders. Trust them. Then, as an afterthought, Corporal Daniels will maintain base medical supplies and provide logistic support from the rear. A low murmur rippled through the ranks. Someone whispered, "Makes sense. Keep her where she can't screw anything up." A female voice joined in, louder, Corporal Lewis from Intelligence. "If she can't handle field work, she shouldn't be here." Elena didn't turn, didn't let them see her jaw tighten. When the briefing ended, Morrison stopped her on the way out. "Daniels," he said in that tone adults use for children, "your job's simple. Maintain inventory, restock when needed, stay out of the way." He paused. Field's no place for someone without proper prep. "Yes, Sergeant." He nodded, satisfied, and walked off to rejoin the medics, his real team. Elena headed for the supply depot. Inside, she worked methodically, assembling trauma kits for every squad: nasopharyngeal airways, chest seals, hemostatic gauze, Israeli bandages, all in logical order for combat access. Every motion was muscle memory from places far worse than this training camp. At 1400 hours, a voice cut through the air from the entrance. Is there a real medic here?" Private Jackson stood there, holding a blood-soaked t-shirt around his hand. Elena stepped forward. "Let me see." Jackson hesitated. "It's probably nothing." "Sit down," she said, calm but firm. He obeyed. The cut was deep, past the dermis, maybe into fascia. She cleaned it with practiced efficiency, wrapped it tight, sealed it with perfect tension. Jackson stared as she worked. You've done this before." "Yes." When she was done, the bleeding had stopped completely. The dressing looked like it came from a hospital ward. Jackson flexed his hand, impressed. "That's actually really good. Where'd you learn that?" "Basic training," she said. He blinked, skeptical, but didn't argue. "Thanks." She nodded once and went back to work. That night, as the base prepared for deployment, the tension thickened. Engines idled, weapons were checked and rechecked. And once again, no one noticed the woman quietly packing their lifelines with precision they didn't even recognize. Martinez and Williams were near the armory again, phones out, laughing. "If Tent Girl makes it through the exercise, I'll buy drinks for a week." "You'll never have to pay up," Williams said. Elena walked past them without a word. In her mind, she was already thinking through trauma response flowcharts, heat casualties, fractures, blast simulations. While they laughed about her, she was preparing to keep them alive. Dawn came too soon. By 500, the base roared with engines and shouted orders. Elena loaded the supply truck, every crate secured, every latch tested. Her truck would roll last in the convoy, rear support, the invisible tale of the operation. "Try not to get lost on the way," Shin called from his vehicle as they rolled out. More laughter. She didn't answer. The convoy stretched across the desert, 12 vehicles raising dust under a pink morning sky. Elena drove in silence. The radio crackled with chatter, the heat already rising. When they reached grid reference 14, she parked in the designated area and began setting up the medical cache. Crates, labels, pathways, all organized for efficiency. Morrison arrived with his medics 40 minutes later. He looked around her setup with that searching expression people get when they're hopping to find a mistake. "The arrangement looks adequate," he said finally. "Remember, you're here for resupply only. Any real medical situation, you call one of us. Understood?" "Yes, Sergeant." He nodded and left, instantly more animated with his male medics than he'd ever been with her. By mid-morning, the first radio calls came in. Heat casualties, simulated injuries, all part of the exercise. Elena responded quickly, efficiently, always from the background. No one asked her opinion. No one noticed how her eyes tracked their mistakes, the wrong angle on an IV, the missed compression point on a wound. She never corrected them, not yet. She just listened, watched, waited. When the day ended, she sat beside her supply truck under a cooling desert sky. Around her, the base buzzed with laughter and exhaustion. But she stayed quiet. They thought she was a background player, a clerk with a clipboard, a tent girl counting bandages. But she was something else entirely. Something no one here had realized. Not yet. But they would. Why did the heat feel heavier that morning, like the air itself was testing them? By 700, the temperature had already crossed 90 degrees. The sky was colorless, the kind of pale blue that promised nothing but exhaustion. Major Cassidy's morning briefing cut through the noise of generators and clinking canteens. "Hydration protocols are not optional today," she said, her tone iron-flat. "Conditions will push everyone to the limit. I expect professional performance, not excuses." Elena stood toward the back of the formation again, helmet under her arm, uniform neat but dust-stained. She'd been awake since before dawn, already checking and double-checking every trauma kit. In front of her, Martinez elbowed Williams. "Day 2 and tent girls still standing. I'm impressed." Williams smirked. "Day, not over yet. Give it till the afternoon when the real heat hits. My money says she finds some excuse by 1600. They didn't lower their voices. They didn't need to. Elena heard them, of course. She always did. But her focus was elsewhere, on the horizon, on the stillness before the day's first drills. She was already cataloging scenarios in her mind. Heat stroke, dehydration, sprains from uneven terrain. And the one nobody ever planned for: panic. Major Cassidy dismissed the formation. "Move out. Execution begins in 15. Engines roared to life. Soldiers moved with routine precision. To anyone watching, Elena was just another cog in the logistical machine, a supply corporal doing her quiet, background job. But behind that calm, her mind was alive with data, procedures, probabilities. She could feel the day building towards something. The first half of the morning went smoothly, simulated ambushes, minor injuries, radio chatter that stayed disciplined. At 1100 hours, Patterson called for rehydration salts. Elena drove the small resupply vehicle through shimmering heat toward his sector. He barely looked up when she arrived. "Thanks, Daniels, leave it by the crate." She nodded, about to turn away, when one of his soldiers, Corporal Hayes, spoke up. "You're the one who fixed Jackson's hand, right? Heard it was pretty pro work." Patterson cut in before she could answer. "Basic wound care, nothing complicated. Let's stay focused." Hayes hesitated, eyes narrowing slightly. "Sure, Sergeant." Elena left without another word. But Hayes's tone lingered, a small crack in the wall. By 1300 hours, the desert became a furnace. The light shimmered, bending shapes, swallowing detail. The kind of heat that made men stumble before they realized they were falling. Radio chatter increased, short bursts, clipped voices, rising tension. Staff Sergeant Morrison came through the command frequency. All medics maintain heightened vigilance for heat casualties, conditions approaching critical. Elena's hand paused over the radio dial. Critical. That word carried weight. She'd seen soldiers die in training before, men who thought they could outlast the sun. Every instinct told her something was coming. At 14:20, it hit. A voice cut through the static, urgent, raw. Base medical, this is Medic 4. I need immediate assistance. Heat casualty, unresponsive, possible heat stroke. Grid Alpha 758, request backup. It was Chin, and his voice had lost its earlier arrogance. Morrison answered, calm but clipped. Medic 1, divert to Medic 4's position. Medic 2, stand by for secondary support. Chin, update patient status. Private Berkshire, male 22, collapsed during movement drill, unconscious, skin hot and dry, temp 107.3, starting cooling procedures now. 107.3. Elena didn't wait for further orders. She was already moving, grabbing ice packs, cold saline, IV gear, loading everything into her vehicle. The desert blurred past as she drove, tires skimming dust. Her mind snapped into combat rhythm. At that temperature, the body was a time bomb. Brain, liver, kidneys, all shutting down by the minute. There was no room for textbook packing now. She reached the grid in 7 minutes. Under the shade of a truck, Chin was working frantically, applying wet cloths to the limp body of Private Berkshire. Stevens knelt beside him, sweat running into his eyes, fumbling with an IV line. Elena's voice cut through the air, level, calm, absolute. What's his core temp now? Chin looked up startled, still climbing, 107.5. Then you need intraosseous access, she said. Peripheral veins are collapsed. You won't get a flow rate high enough. Stevens blinked, uncertain. That's for extreme cases. This is an extreme case, Elena interrupted. Her tone stayed even, but her eyes locked on his. You have maybe 8 minutes before irreversible brain damage, tibial insertion. Now. She opened the emergency kit, pulled out the intraosseous drill. Her movements were clean, confident, not the fumbling of a tent girl. Stevens hesitated, then surrendered to her certainty. Show me the insertion point. She guided his hand. 2 finger widths below the tibial tuberosity. Drill straight in. You'll feel the pop. He did. The drill bit hit bone. The needle seated cleanly. Good, she said. Now pressure infuse 2 liters cold saline. Pack ice to axilla, groin, neck. Core vessels only. Surface cooling won't be enough. The medics followed her commands automatically. The sound of clinking bags, rushing fluids, labored breathing. 3 minutes later, Berkshire's pulse started to strengthen. 5 minutes later, he stirred. 7 minutes later, his temperature was dropping 105, 104. Rodriguez arrived with the medevac vehicle, just as Berkshire started to regain consciousness. What the hell happened here? He asked. Heat stroke, Stevens said, voice tight. Critical, Daniels called the IO access, saved him. Rodriguez froze, glancing from Stevens to Elena. He didn't say anything, but his face told the story, the recalculation already underway. When Major Cassidy arrived moments later, she took one look at the scene, the IO line, the controlled operation, the calm under pressure, and understood more than she said. You recommended the intraosseous line, she asked. Yes, ma'am, Elena replied simply. Good call, Cassidy said. Probably prevented permanent complications, Make sure it's documented." The major turned to leave, then paused, studying Elena for one long moment. "Where exactly did you receive your medical training?" "Fort Sam Houston, ma'am. Combat Medic Specialist course." It was the truth, just not the whole of it. Cassidy nodded slowly and walked away. The silence that followed was heavy. Chin was the first to break it. "That was solid work," he said, voice subdued. "You recognized it fast." Elena nodded once. "I've seen it before." Stephen swallowed. "Thanks, you saved his life." Elena began repacking her equipment. "I did my job." But something had changed in the air. Something fragile. Respect maybe, or the first thread of it. Back at the supply station, the radio tone had shifted. When Patterson called for resupply that evening, his voice was different. No condescension, no sigh. "Appreciate the quick turnaround, Daniels." She replied simply, "Copy that." Moments later, Staff Sergeant Morrison arrived. His face was unreadable. "I heard about Berkshire. The IO call. That's advanced protocol. Most medics wouldn't have caught it that fast." Elena didn't look up from her checklist. "It was the appropriate intervention, Sergeant." He studied her for a moment. "Major Cassidy says you trained at Fort Sam. Standard medic course." "Yes, Sergeant, plus additional specialty training." He waited for more, but she didn't offer it. After a pause, he nodded. "If you see something out there that concerns you, speak up. Don't wait for orders." "Permission." For the first time. He walked away. By nightfall, the desert was quiet again. The heat dropped to bearable, the stars sharp against black sky. Elena sat near her supply truck, working by red light, reorganizing packs, calibrating equipment, methodical as always. Private Jackson appeared from the dark. "Hey, Daniels," he lifted his bandaged hand. "This thing healed perfect. No pain, no swelling. Honestly better than the stitches I got at the hospital once." "That's good," she said. He hesitated. "Why have they got you stuck back here doing supply? You clearly know more than the rest of them." She didn't answer right away. "How's your range of motion?" He flexed his hand. "Perfect." "Then that's what matters." He lingered, then nodded slowly. "If you ever need anything, I got your back." When he left, the night fell silent again. Hours later, the camp lights dimmed under tactical discipline. The only sounds were distant radio clicks, soft wind through canvas, the rhythmic murmur of soldiers trying to rest. Elena sat cross-legged in the dust, her hands busy organizing instruments by feel alone. She thought about Berkshire, his temperature, his pulse, the moment the line went in and everything turned. She thought about the way Stephen's voice had changed when he said thank you. The hesitation in Morrison's eyes. The small, growing space where disbelief had been. She wasn't proud, she wasn't vindicated. She was just quietly tired. All day they had tested her patience. And for the first time, she'd shown them a fraction of what she really was. Not a supply clerk. Not a liability. Not the tent girl who couldn't handle pressure. But a combat medic, the kind who'd stopped bleeding under fire, held men together with her bare hands, whispered lies of reassurance to the dying, just to keep them calm. They didn't know those stories yet. They didn't know what she'd already seen. The smell of blood and heat, the sound of men calling for mothers who couldn't hear them. No, they didn't know. But maybe now they'd start to look. She lay down beside her truck, staring at the indifferent stars. Tomorrow would be harder. Hotter. Meaner. And one day soon, something would break. Whether it was the exercise or the silence around her. Either way, she'd be ready. Because real medics, the ones forged in chaos, always were. Why did the wind feel wrong that morning? It came from the east, dry, restless, carrying something that didn't belong to the desert. Elena noticed it before sunrise. The way the sand shifted against her boots, the faint smell of ozone. To anyone else, it was just another day in nowhere. To her, it felt like the world was holding its breath. By 500, the base was alive again. Engines warming, radios crackling, boots against gravel. Day 3 of the field operation, halfway through the exercise, or so the schedule said. Major Cassidy gathered her officers outside the command tent. Today we push into Zone Echo. Terrain elevation rises. Expect comms interference. Simulated engagements will be unpredictable. Everyone stays alert. She didn't mention the wind. No one did. Elena stood at the back again, near the supply truck, listening. Staff Sergeant Morrison gave her a quick nod, the first hint of respect since they'd met. "You did good work yesterday," he said quietly. "Keep your gear mobile. We might need you closer to the field today." "Yes, Sergeant." The words were plain, but the meaning was. She was moving up, closer to the front lines, closer to where the heat became real. The convoy rolled out across the barren rise, engines low, dust plumbing in the pale light. Elena's truck trailed near the midline this time, not the rear. Her eyes scanned constantly, horizon, road, ridgelines, old habits. She learned long ago that danger never announced itself. It whispered in irregularities. Private Hayes sat beside her as navigator, map folded in his lap. He'd volunteered partly to help, partly out of curiosity. "So," he said, breaking the silence, "you really were combat trained." Elena's gaze stayed on the horizon. "Everyone here is trained private." "Yeah, but not like that I.O. call yesterday. That was precision. You've seen field action before, haven't you?" She didn't answer. The engine filled the pause. He exhaled softly. "You don't have to say it, I can tell." For a moment her lips almost twitched, not quite a smile, more like acknowledgement. She respected people who observed rather than assumed. The radio crackled suddenly, Morrison's voice. "All convoys maintain spacing. Possible signal interference ahead. Keep visuals sharp." Hayes frowned. "Signal interference during training." Elena didn't respond. She just reached for her rifle and set it closer. Zone Echo wasn't like the flatlands near base. It was jagged, scattered with rock spires and narrow passes that swallowed sound. They set up the temporary forward camp by 900, the air already shimmering with heat. Elena offloaded her medical crates with quiet speed, building a small field station near Morrison's command post. The soldiers moved through drills, tactical formations, casualty simulations, controlled chaos. But beneath it all, the tension was new. A different kind of silence. The kind that meant something unseen was watching. By noon, even Major Cassidy had noticed. She stepped into the field post, removing her cap, sweat streaking down her neck. "Communications are unstable. We're getting ghost signals from the south perimeter." "Ghost signals?" Morrison asked. "Encrypted bursts, not ours. Probably atmospheric distortion." Elena said nothing, but her eyes met Cassidy's briefly. They both knew distortion didn't come in encrypted bursts. At 1300 hours, the first casualty call came through. "Simulated blast injury, Squad Bravo. Request medical verification." Elena and Chin moved together, crossing the rocky rise with their kits. The injured soldier, Private Darrell, lay under a mock detonation marker, groaning dramatically. Chin chuckled, someone enjoying the acting part of training. Elena knelt anyway, checking vitals, verifying safety. Everything procedural, everything calm. But halfway through her assessment, her earpiece crackled again. Static, then a voice faint, fractured. "Base command, this is Delta Squad taking." Then nothing. She froze. "Repeat transmission. Delta, confirm your last." The radio hissed back only noise. Chin frowned, comms interference. Maybe, she said, but her eyes had sharpened. That didn't sound simulated. They packed up fast and moved. By the time they reached the next ridge, the air had changed. It carried dust, smoke, and something metallic. The kind of scent that lived in her bones, cordite. Elena's voice lowered. That's not from blanks. They crested the ridge and froze. Below them, smoke curled around the valley floor. Vehicles were scattered, not the tidy, staged pattern of drills but chaos. Soldiers moved erratically, shouting into dead radios. Someone was screaming. Elena dropped into a crouch. Chin stared pale. What the hell? She cut him off. Stay low, identify casualties. Don't expose yourself until you know your angles. It came out automatically. Command tone, battlefield instinct. Chin didn't question it, he followed. They moved between vehicles, dust and noise closing around them. The first real casualty lay half under a truck, chest rising shallowly, shrapnel embedded deep. Elena's breath caught for a heartbeat, not fear, but focus locking in. She pulled the man free, tore open his vest. Arterial bleed upper thorax, chin occlusive dressing, now. He fumbled with his pack. She already had her hand on a chest seal, pressing it tight. Breath sounds, she said. Left diminished, Chin said. Tension pneumo, decompressing. Her knife was already in hand, needle in. Air hissed out like relief from the world itself. The soldier gasped, alive. Chin stared wide-eyed. How did you? She didn't answer, just moved to the next one. 3 more casualties, 1 DOA, 2 stable. The simulated mission was gone. This was combat. By the time Morrison and Cassidy arrived, chaos had swallowed order. Someone was shouting about an explosion near the southern perimeter, real ordnance, not blanks. Smoke was visible from miles away. Cassidy's face was carved in tension. Who authorized live munitions? No one answered. Then the radio crackled again, distorted, urgent. Unknown hostiles, grid Foxtrot 7 ambush, we. Then static. The major's eyes met Elena. Daniels, get triage established. We have wounded inbound. Yes, ma'am. The moment she said it, the rest of the camp seemed to pivot around her. Chin followed her without hesitation now, so did Stevens. They threw together a triage zone in the open dirt, IV bags hanging from rifle barrels, tarps laid out in rows. It was improvised, brutal, real. The first wave of wounded arrived within minutes. Gunfire echoed faintly in the distance. Someone shouted that drones were confirming movement near the ridge, unknown origin. Cassidy's voice cut through the panic. This is no longer a drill. We're under actual attack. No one spoke after that. The desert itself seemed to hold still. For the next 20 minutes, Elena became the center of controlled madness. She moved like she'd been born for it, triage, stabilization, direction. Hold that pressure. Don't lift it, I don't care if he screams. Chin, I need a line here now. Stevens, airway kit, no, not that size, 28. Her voice cut through confusion like a blade, calm, sure, unflinching. Soldiers who'd ignored her 2 days ago now looked at her like a compass in a storm. When she barked orders, they moved. When she told them someone was gone, they stopped arguing. Major Cassidy moved beside her, radio in one hand, pistol in the other. We've got reinforcements rolling from base, ETA 25 minutes. You can hold this. Yes, ma'am. Cassidy nodded once, as if that was enough. And somehow it was. A sudden explosion tore through the western edge, a truck igniting in orange bloom. Shrapnel whistled through air. Elena ducked instinctively, shielding a wounded soldier with her body. Pain ripped across her left arm, hot, sharp. She didn't even look. just tore her sleeve open, saw blood and kept moving. "Daniels, you're hit," Chin shouted. "Minor," she snapped. "Keep pressure on Bravo 3. The air thickened with smoke, the kind that stung eyes and coated tongues. And still she worked. IV lines, dressings, reassurance murmured to the barely conscious. Her voice was steady, even when her own hand began to tremble. Someone shouted, "We're out of saline." She turned, scanning, then saw it, a supply truck overturned 50 meters out, boxes spilled into open sand. "Cover me," she said. Before anyone could object, she was already moving, low, fast, weaving between wreckage. Bullets cracked overhead, stray rounds from the ridge. She reached the truck, tore open a crate, grabbed 3 bags of saline and a pressure cuff. A fragment of memory flashed through her, another place, another war. Her first deployment. The man whose pulse had faded under her hands. The whisper she'd never forgotten, "Don't let me die in the dirt." She blinked hard and ran back through the smoke. By the time reinforcements arrived, triage was stabilized. 7 wounded, 2 critical. No fatalities among those she'd treated. Major Cassidy stood at the edge of the chaos, headset pressed tight, voice low as she relayed coordinates to command. When she turned back, her eyes fell on Elena, bloodied sleeve, dirt-streaked face, steady hands. "Daniels," she said quietly, "you just held a forward triage under live fire." Elena looked up, eyes calm, almost detached. "Yes, ma'am." Cassidy studied her. "You've done this before." Silence. Then softly, "Yes, ma'am, Afghanistan 2 tour, combat medic 1st Infantry." Cassidy blinked. "Then why the hell are you back here as logistics support?" Elena glanced toward the wounded lined in quiet rows. "Because last time, I couldn't save everyone." Cassidy didn't speak for a long moment. Finally she said, "You did today." Elena looked away. "Not yet." The night came cold and hollow. They buried 1 soldier before dawn, the only fatality from the ambush perimeter, a young radio tech who'd never fired his weapon. The entire base stood silent as the flag draped his form. The wind had calmed again, but the air still felt heavy. Elena stood at the edge of the gathering, her arm bandaged, her uniform torn. No one whispered about her anymore. No one laughed. Even Williams, who'd once bet she wouldn't last a day, nodded quietly when he passed her. Chin approached, eyes tired but grateful. "Berkshire's stable. They said he asked who treated him. I told him it was you." She nodded, voice low. "Good." He hesitated. "You know, when this started, I thought you were just some re-echelon filler, but what I saw today." He stopped, searching for words. "You didn't just save them, you saved us." She didn't reply, just kept looking at the horizon. Out there the desert looked calm again. But she knew better. Calm was only the space between storms. And something told her this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. How do you go back to routine after hearing real screams? The day after the ambush, forward operating base striker was quiet, too quiet. Not the silence of order, the silence of exhaustion. Helicopters came and went in the dawn, lifting the wounded toward the horizon. The soldiers moved differently now, slower, quieter, eyes scanning even when told it was secure. No one mentioned training exercise anymore. The word itself felt obscene. Major Cassidy's voice carried across the assembly field. "We were hit by an unidentified force operating outside the simulation perimeter. Investigation ongoing. Until further notice, all exercises are suspended." Her tone was iron, but her eyes gave her away. She didn't have answers, not yet. Elena stood at the rear of the formation, sleeve rolled over a fresh bandage. The desert wind tugged at her hair. Cassidy continued, "I want commendations noted for exceptional medical performance under fire. Corporal Daniels, Your actions saved multiple lives. Dozens of heads turned, some in surprise, some in quiet shame. Elena didn't move, didn't react. She didn't need applause. She just wanted to sleep. Later that morning, the base returned to function, but not rhythm. Radio checks, gear inspections, the small rituals of people pretending the world made sense again. Staff Sergeant Morrison found her near the medical tent, restocking IV fluids. He cleared his throat. Heard command put you in for a field citation. She didn't look up. I didn't ask for one. I know, he said. He hesitated, then added quietly, You did good work, Daniels. I should have seen it sooner. She paused mid-motion, eyes still on the supply crate. It's easier not to see what you don't expect, Sergeant. The words hung there, simple but heavy. He nodded, as if they hit harder than he'd admit. Then he walked off, leaving her in the quiet hum of the tent. The investigation started by noon. 2 officers from Central Command arrived, sharp uniforms, colder eyes. They moved through the camp like ghosts, questioning, recording, dissecting. Their tone wasn't grateful, it was clinical, suspicious. Where were you positioned during the initial detonation? One of them asked Elena. With Medic 4, she answered evenly, responding to a heat casualty call. And you engaged in emergency triage procedures without authorization. She looked up, meeting the officer's stare. I engaged because soldiers were dying. He frowned. Protocol dictates. Protocol, she interrupted softly, doesn't account for a man with shrapnel in his chest and 8 minutes to live. The silence after that felt like a standoff. The officer finally said, Noted. They left. But as she watched them go, something cold moved under her skin. It wasn't over. By evening, the base had settled into a fragile rhythm again. A generator hummed, radios hissed faintly. The desert light turned gold and red, the kind of beauty only soldiers noticed because they didn't know if they'd see it again. Elena sat outside her tent, cleaning her field knife. The blood had long dried, but the motion gave her something to do, something repetitive, grounding. Private Hayes walked over, holding 2 canteens. Figured you might want clean water, he said. You've been on your feet all day. She looked up, thanks. He hesitated, then sat beside her quiet. They watched the sun slide down the horizon for a while before he spoke again. You've seen real combat before, haven't you? She didn't answer at first. Her eyes stayed on the knife, its dull gleam catching the light. Yes. Where? Helmand Province, Sangin Marja. He exhaled slowly. That's not light duty. No, she said softly, it was. He didn't ask more, he didn't have to. Her tone said enough. After a pause, she added, We lost 6 men in one night. I was the only medic left conscious. No airlift, no backup, just dark and sand and bleeding. Her voice stayed calm, but behind it, the tremor of memory. I kept working until the morphine ran out. Then I started lying to them, told them help was coming, told them they'd make it, even when I knew they wouldn't. The silence stretched. Hayes swallowed. Why'd you come back? She sheathed the knife slowly. Because one of them did make it. He sent a letter a year later, said he lived because I stayed, said he named his kid after me. A faint, distant smile crossed her lips. And I realized, maybe one life is enough reason to keep trying. Hayes didn't know what to say. He just nodded, quietly respectful. When he left, the desert had turned silver under the moon. And she sat there alone again, the quiet pressing close, like a weight she'd learned to carry. The next morning brought more tension. The investigation had found traces of real explosives, not training grade. Fragments of manufactured ordnance, unmarked. Someone had brought live munitions inside the exercise perimeter. The camp's atmosphere thickened with unease. Everyone was a suspect. Major Cassidy called an emergency meeting with squad leaders and field medics. The tent was cramped, hot, suffocating. Elena stood near the entrance, silent as always. Cassidy spoke sharply. Until command identifies the source, we assume the threat is local, possible sabotage. I need readiness at 100%. Someone asked, "You think it's internal?" Cassidy's jaw tightened, until proven otherwise. Morrison looked uneasy. "If that's true, we're sitting ducks." "Then we make damn sure we're not," Cassidy said. "We double perimeter checks, verify ammo, and—" The tent flap opened. The investigators stepped in, followed by a new figure, older, lean, uniform faded but marked with a general's insignia. Cassidy straightened. "General Crane, sir." The general surveyed the room, eyes sharp, expression unreadable. His presence carried the kind of quiet that demanded silence. "I read the reports," he said finally, "and I read the casualty list." His gaze moved until it stopped on Elena. "You're Daniels?" "Yes, sir." "I also read your service record. 2 combat tour, 1 commendation for valor, medical discharge 3 years ago, PTSD classification, non-combat reassignment. That correct?" "Yes, sir." "Then what are you doing here, Corporal?" Her voice was calm, measured. "Trying to be useful again, sir." The general studied her for a long time. "Useful," he repeated quietly. "You saved 7 lives under live fire. You think that's not useful?" "I think it doesn't erase the ones I didn't save," she said softly. The tent was silent. Even Cassidy looked down. Crane's eyes lingered on her for a long moment, then softened. "You did more than most people ever will. Don't carry ghosts that weren't yours to save." He turned back to Cassidy. "Proceed with investigation. Daniels, stay close to command. I may need your field experience." "Yes, sir." When he left, the tent exhaled collectively, as if the air had been trapped until then. Morrison leaned toward her, voice low. "You didn't tell anyone you were discharged from combat duty." "I wasn't asked." He almost smiled. "You know you're full of surprises." She shrugged. "People stop asking questions when they think they already know the answers." That night the wind returned, cold, irregular, whispering through tents. The base lights dimmed to conserve fuel. Somewhere beyond the perimeter, a coyote cried, or something that sounded like one. Elena couldn't sleep. She lay awake, watching shadows shift across the ceiling. Her body ached, but her mind wouldn't stop moving, replaying the chaos, the screams, the blood. She got up quietly, stepped outside. The stars were sharp, endless. For a moment, she let herself breathe. Then a faint metallic click broke the stillness. Her head snapped toward the sound. It came from near the fuel depot, soft, deliberate. Too deliberate. She moved silently, staying in the dark edges between tents. The closer she got, the clearer it became, 2 figures near the depot, bent over something metallic. Not repair work, not maintenance. One whispered, the other answered in a language that wasn't English. Elena's pulse slowed, not panic, calculation. She reached for her radio, pressed transmit. "Major Cassidy, Daniels, possible unauthorized presence at fuel depot, 2 figures, unknown origin." Static. No response. She tried again, nothing. Signal dead. They jammed comms again. She crouched lower, watching the figures work. Shapes of detonators, wires, movement too precise for amateurs. Her breath steadied. She'd seen this before, the calm before everything burns. Then she moved. Silent, fast, efficient. Closed the distance. Struck the first one low behind the knee. He dropped with a muffled grunt. The second turned, she caught his wrist, slammed it against the crate, twisted until the detonator clattered loose. He tried to reach for a weapon. She hit him once hard, and he went still. The air filled with the sound of her heartbeat. She exhaled slowly, then grabbed the radio again. "This is Daniels. Fuel depot secured. 2 hostiles detained. They were planting." Static. No connection. But now the camp was stirring, lights flicking on, voices shouting. Figures running from tents. Cassidy arrived within minutes, sidearm drawn. "What the hell happened?" Elena pointed to the bound men. "Sabotage attempt. They were rigging the depot." Cassidy's expression hardened. "Where the comms link?" "Down again," Elena said. The major cursed under her breath. "We're being played hard." By dawn, the captives were secured, the explosives diffused. Command confirmed they weren't actors. No records, no ID. But their equipment, military grade. Cassidy met with General Crane outside the command post. Elena stood nearby, silent. Crane turned toward her after the briefing. "You saw them first?" "Yes, sir." He nodded slowly. "You keep seeing what no one else does." His tone wasn't just approval, it was curiosity. He studied her one last time. "You were supposed to be here to count bandages, Corporal, but somehow you keep saving my soldiers." Elena looked down briefly. "I'm just doing what needs to be done, sir." Crane's gaze softened. "Funny thing about people like you, Daniels. The ones who do what needs to be done are usually the last to realize how much the rest of us need them." He walked away, leaving her standing in the morning light, wind tugging at her sleeve. She watched the horizon, endless, brutal, beautiful. And for the first time since the attack, she let herself breathe again. But deep down she knew this wasn't over. It never was. Not for people like her. How do you heal when the war keeps finding you? The sun rose hard and white the next morning. No music from the mess hall, no chatter, only the wind brushing over tarps and metal. Elena moved through the base like someone working inside a memory, efficient, silent, not quite present. She restocked trauma packs, checked IV bags, counted morphine ampules one by one. Numbers were steady, they didn't lie. People did. From outside came clipped voices. The investigators again, their polished boots grinding dust as they questioned soldiers. "Describe your movements after 0300. Who had access to restricted supplies? Did anyone leave their post?" Everyone sounded guilty now, even those who weren't. Major Cassidy stepped into the tent. Her uniform was neat, but her eyes looked like they hadn't closed in 30 hours. "Command wants a full readiness report by noon. I need you to audit every field kit personally. No delegation." "Yes, ma'am." Cassidy hesitated. "And Daniels, you should know. They're rotating some of the investigators out. New team coming in with Crane tomorrow. Counterintelligence." Elena understood what that meant. They thought it was sabotage from inside. "Understood." Cassidy's gaze softened. "You did good work last night. You probably saved the whole base." Elena looked down at her bandaged hand. "It doesn't feel like saving. It feels like delaying." The major studied her, then nodded once. "Sometimes delay is survival." The hours crawled. She moved from tent to tent, checking every corner of the base, every kit, every needle cap. Each item had a story, each bloodstain a person. She cataloged them quietly, like a priest memorizing names of the fallen. Near the perimeter, she found Private Williams cleaning a Humvee radiator. He looked up awkwardly. "Hey, Daniels." His tone had changed. No mockery, just the rough humility of someone who'd seen his own limits. "You need more saline in the back," she said. He nodded quickly. "Already requested, and sorry for before." She paused. "For what?" "The jokes, the bets, we were idiots." She tightened a strap on her med kit. "You were soldiers trying to survive boredom. It's fine." He swallowed. Still, you earned better than that. She didn't reply, but her eyes softened for a moment before she walked on. By late afternoon, the heat shimmered so thick the ground seemed to breathe. The radio crackled, Major Cassidy calling all squad leaders to the command tent. Inside, maps were spread across the table. General Crane stood beside Cassidy, his presence filling the space like a storm cloud. Satellite scans confirm multiple signatures moving south of our perimeter, he said. Small formations, no transponders. Whoever hit us wasn't alone. Cassidy frowned. You think they're repositioning? Crane nodded. Or regrouping. He turned toward Elena. You found those saboteurs first. What did you notice? Elena hesitated, aware of all eyes on her. They moved like trained personnel. No wasted motion. One of them used American-issue pliers, manufacturer-grade restricted to federal contracts. Crane's jaw tightened. So either stolen gear or inside access. She nodded once. Their detonator wires were standard field stock, same as ours. Cassidy looked at Crane, meaning someone feeding them supplies from inside, the general said. We've got a mole. The room went still. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the flap of canvas in the wind. That night, watch rotations doubled. No one slept deeply. Every clang of metal, every gust of wind felt like a warning. Elena sat outside her tent again, writing brief notes by red light. Not a diary, more like a ledger, times, sounds, details she didn't trust memory to hold. Private Hayes appeared, carrying a thermos. Coffee substitute, he said, offering it. It's terrible, but it's warm. She took it with a faint nod. They sat side by side, facing the dark ridge line. After a while he asked, do you ever get used to it, the waiting? She shook her head. You don't get used to fear, you just learn its shape. He thought about that. Then what keeps you here? Her eyes traced the horizon. People, the good ones, the ones worth saving. He looked at her profile in the dim light, the calm, the restraint, and said quietly, you talk like someone who's already lost too many. She didn't answer, she didn't have to. Just past midnight, the base alarm jolted them both upright. A flare streaked across the sky, red then white. Incoming transmission from Patrol Delta. Contact, taking fire East Ridge, coordinates. Static swallowed the rest. Elena was already running. Boots, rifle, medkit. Her body moved before thought caught up. At the command post, Cassidy barked orders into her radio. All squads to Eastern Defense. Reinforce Patrol Delta. Elena grabbed her gear. Permission to move with Alpha. They'll need a medic. Cassidy looked at her, eyes fierce. Granted, stay alive, Daniels. The eastern ridge glowed faintly with gunfire when they reached it. The smell of burned sand and propellant filled the air. Alpha Squad returned fire in disciplined bursts, taking cover behind rocks. Elena dropped beside Sergeant Morrison. Where's your wounded? Over that rise, 2 down, 1 serious. She crawled through grit toward the cries, adrenaline narrowing the world to light and breath and sound. The first soldier had a leg wound, arterial but clean. The second, chest hit, shallow breathing. She tore open his vest, found the entry wound. Exit. Back shoulder, Morrison said. She pressed gauze, sealed, stabilized. Through and through, you're lucky. The young man's eyes fluttered. Lucky, yeah. She smiled briefly. Don't ruin it by talking. Overhead, tracer rounds cut the night like red rain. Her hands moved faster. When another explosion rocked the ridge, she covered the wounded with her own body. Shrapnel hissed past, close enough to feel. Morrison shouted, we've got to pull back, we're pinned. She yelled back, not without them. 2 minutes later, support fire arrived from the base perimeter, suppressing the attackers. By the time silence returned, 3 enemy bodies lay motionless in the dust, Dark uniforms, no insignia. Cassidy's voice came through the radio. Status. Morrison replied, ridge secure, casualties stable, no friendly KIA. Elena exhaled slowly, only now realizing her own pulse hammering against her ribs. At dawn, the survivors sat in the dust, drinking warm water and shaking in that quiet way soldiers do when the adrenaline bleeds out. Morrison crouched beside her. You held that position longer than anyone. Command wants you debriefed. Tell them I'm fine. Not that kind of debrief, he said. Crane wants details now. Inside the command tent, General Crane stood over a tablet, examining satellite overlays. He didn't look up when she entered. They were probing our defenses. Small team, testing response time. Yes, sir. You saw them up close. One, he wasn't local. Boots were European make. Patch on his gear, cut off cleanly before contact. Crane nodded slowly. Contractors maybe, or ghosts. He finally met her eyes. You've got instincts, Daniels, the kind I used to trust. Her expression didn't change. Instincts get people killed if no one listens. He almost smiled. Then I'm listening. He handed her a datapad, grid references, terrain maps, intercepted chatter. Command wants reconnaissance tomorrow. Limited team. You'll go with Major Cassidy and 2 recon scouts. Identify origin point of those signals. Sir, I'm not recon. No, he said. You're alive, that's qualification enough. That night she sat alone again, map spread across her knees, tracing potential routes with a gloved finger. Every choice had a cost. Every silence a consequence. She remembered the letter she'd received years ago, the one from the soldier she'd saved in Helmand. You said you weren't brave, Daniels, but you stayed. That's all bravery ever is. She folded the memory back into her chest and kept planning. Before dawn, the small team assembled. Cassidy, Elena, and 2 scouts, Tors and Lynn. No vehicles, silent approach. They moved through the broken desert in muted light, the horizon bleeding pale orange. The only sound was boots in sand and the whisper of wind through stone. After 2 hours, Tors signaled a halt. He crouched, pointing ahead. Thermal contacts, 2, maybe 3 heat signatures near the ravine. Cassidy whispered, could be recon, could be hostiles. Elena studied the terrain, angles, cover, routes of retreat. Move left, wind in our favor, cross shadow will mask us. Cassidy glanced at her, faint surprise flickering. You've done this before. Once or twice. They crept forward. The ravine opened like a wound in the earth, sharp rocks, old machinery, tire tracks leading into a hollow. Inside, tents, equipment, boxes of supplies marked with military serial codes. Elena's breath caught. That's ours. Tors whispered, someone's bleeding us from inside. Cassidy lifted her radio. This is Recon 1. We have visual confirmation of stolen supplies, possible hostile cache. Static again. No signal. Elena felt the hair on her neck rise. They're jamming local bands. They know we're here. A click echoed from above, metal on metal. Down, she shouted. Gunfire erupted from the ridge, tearing sand into the air. Tors dropped instantly, hit in the shoulder. Cassidy returned fire, controlled bursts. Elena dragged Tors behind cover, hands slick with blood. Through and through upper humerus, you'll live, stay still. Lynn threw smoke grenades, buying seconds. They moved under the cover of dust, retreating toward the canyon mouth. Then a second explosion ripped the ground behind them, hurling dirt and shrapnel skyward. Elena hit the sand hard, ears ringing. Cassidy crawled toward her. You good? Alive, Elena said, coughing. Radio still dead. Cassidy's jaw set. Then we run blind. They moved, half dragging Tors, half running through smoke. Bullets hissed around them like angry wasps. At the edge of the ravine, Lin was waiting, covering their exit. When they reached him, he fired one last burst and yelled, "Go!" They stumbled through the rocks until the gunfire faded into wind. Only when the world finally went quiet did Elena notice the blood on her sleeve again, someone else's this time. Cassidy leaned against a boulder, breathing hard. "We're not dealing with amateurs." "No," Elena said softly. "We're dealing with someone who knows exactly where we are and what we carry." Cassidy looked at her, realization dawning. "You think they have someone inside command?" Elena didn't answer. She just looked toward the horizon, where the base shimmered faintly in the morning heat. "Then we don't have time to wait for permission," she said. "If they're planning another strike, it won't be sabotage next time." Cassidy's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we go back tonight, quietly, and we find whoever feeding them our lifeline." The major studied her for a long moment. Then with a grim smile she said, "I thought you were just a medic." Elena's gaze was steady. "So did I." They started the long walk back, 4 figures against the endless desert, silhouettes blurred by dust and distance. Each step carried them closer to the truth, and to the storm waiting inside their own camp. How do you fight an enemy you can't see when they wear your own uniform? They reached the base at sunrise, blistered and coated in dust. No fanfare, no waiting medics, just silence. Cassidy reported straight to the command tent. Elena followed, supporting Tors on her shoulder. The camp looked the same flags, same vehicle, same smell of oil and grit. But it felt different. The air carried a tension that didn't belong to exhaustion. It belonged to paranoia. Inside, General Crane looked up from a map display, face unreadable. "You're early." "Because we were ambushed," Cassidy said, voice clipped. "Hostiles in the ravine, military-grade weapons. We confirmed stolen supplies ours." Crane's jaw hardened. "You saw who?" "No insignia, well-trained, precise." He turned to Elena. "You agree?" "Yes, sir," she said. "They knew our schedule, our radio frequencies, even our fallback grid." Cassidy added, "Sir, we have to assume internal compromise." Crane's gaze flicked between them, slow, assessing. Then he said quietly, "Leave it with me. No word of this outside command. Understood?" Cassidy hesitated. "With respect, sir." "That's an order, Major." The tone left no room for argument. Elena met Crane's eyes. For the first time she saw something there, not just authority but calculation. Like he was measuring which of them would be the bigger threat. Later that day, the base felt haunted. No one spoke above a whisper. Everyone checked their weapon twice. Rumors spread faster than truth ever could. Some said the ambush had been staged. Some said the prisoners from the night before had escaped. Some said the tent girl was the one feeding intel. Elena heard that one from Martinez himself, whispered too loudly outside the mess tent. "She's the only one who goes everywhere, right? Every supply chain, every manifest, perfect cover." Williams murmured, "You think she'd do that?" Martinez shrugged. "I think I don't know who the hell anyone is anymore." Elena kept walking, head high. But inside, something old and familiar stirred, the kind of anger that burned cold, not hot. She'd seen it before. When fear needed a name, it always chose the quietest person in the room. That evening she sat on her cot, unwrapping the bandage on her arm. The wound from the shrapnel had reopened, a thin line of red against pale skin. She cleaned it silently, the antiseptic sting grounding her. Outside, footsteps approached. Cassidy ducked in, face shadowed by fatigue. "They're moving the prisoners," she said. "Crane ordered it. Says higher command wants them extracted for questioning." Elena frowned. "By who?" "Didn't say. He's locked down comms too. Only his console has satellite access now." "That's not procedure." "I know." Cassidy sat on the edge of the cot, rubbing her temples. This doesn't feel right. Elena looked at her, the woman who had doubted her, then trusted her with her life. What are you thinking? Cassidy hesitated. I think someone up the chain knows more than they should, and if Crane's locking down information, he's either covering for them. She looked up, meeting Elena's eyes. Or he's them. The silence between them was sharp. Elena said softly, then we don't confront him, not yet. Cassidy nodded slowly. Agreed, but we need proof. They started with what they could control, the supply logs. At midnight, they slipped into the logistics tent. The generator hummed low, casting the place in dim red light. Elena typed quickly, her fingers moving through digital manifests, timestamps, authorizations. Cassidy stood watch at the door, pistol holstered but ready. The hum of electronics filled the air, quiet, rhythmic, dangerous. Then Elena froze. Found something. She pulled up a file, requisition orders for med-grade compounds. Morphine, IV fluid, field rations. Quantities far exceeding base population. All approved by Crane's personal override code. Cassidy leaned in, voice low. He's supplying them. Elena nodded slowly, and masking it under humanitarian shipments. Cassidy's breath shook out. We can't take this to command. If they're compromised, we're signing our death warrants. Elena's eyes didn't leave the screen. Then we take it to the people who can't afford to lie. Who's that? Elena shut off the console, stood up, the one still bleeding. At 300 hours, they slipped through the shadows to the medical wing. Only a skeleton crew was on duty, Rodriguez, a nurse, and 2 patients half awake under dim light. Elena went straight to the records bay, pulled Berkshire's file, then Chin's. She flipped through treatment notes, dates, supply tags. Every batch of morphine used on casualties had a trace number, one that didn't match any of the logged manifests. Cross-manufacture supply, she murmured. Private sector issue. That's how they've been smuggling it. Cassidy watched tense. So what now? Now we prove it left this base, Elena said. She turned toward Rodriguez. Sergeant, when did the supply pallets last leave the depot? He frowned, half asleep. 2 nights ago. Crane ordered a humanitarian drop to Checkpoint Sierra. Cassidy froze. That's 20 miles east, no civilian population for 50. Elena's stomach turned. He's running a ghost convoy. By dawn, they had a plan. Cassidy would fake a malfunction in one of the fuel trucks scheduled for routine maintenance. Elena would hide inside the rear compartment, masked by thermal shielding, to tail the convoy when it moved. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't authorized. But truth never asked for permission. They waited until late morning. Crane's convoy rolled out 2 transports, 1 escort. Elena lay silent under a tarp, body cramped, air thick with diesel and dust. Every bump in the road rattled through her spine. She watched slivers of light flicker through the cracks, the world reduced to shadows and vibration. Minutes blurred into hours. Then through the slats, she saw movement, tents, trucks, people. Not civilians. Armed men in mismatched gear, unloading crates. The convoy stopped. Voices outside, one of them Crane. Shipment complete. Keep the weapons out of sight. Next phase begins at dusk. Elena's pulse slowed, steady and cold. Weapons, not medicine. She caught a glimpse of the crate stamp, Federal Relief Supply. Her own handwriting on the label. He'd used her manifests. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. Not just to her pride, to her purpose. Every supply she'd accounted for, every shipment she'd organized, had been turned into fuel for someone else's war. When the engine started again, she stayed still until the sound faded. Then she crawled out, sand coating her skin, lungs burning with fury. She moved fast, photographs, coordinates, proof, every detail burned into memory. By the time she returned to base under cover of darkness, she was shaking. Not from fear, from restraint. Cassidy met her behind the depot. "What did you find?" Elena handed over the datapad. "Everything. Crane selling weapons to the same hostiles that hit us." Cassidy's face went pale. "You're sure?" He signed the manifests. His voice was there. The major exhaled hard. "Then we have to act before he moves again." Elena looked past her toward the command tent, its flag lit softly in the night wind. "Or before he acts on us." They didn't wait. At 2100 hours, Cassidy called a briefing, officers only. Crane arrived last, hands clasped behind his back, voice calm. "I was told this was urgent." Cassidy nodded. "It is." Elena stepped out from the shadows. "General, we have evidence you've been transferring restricted materiel to enemy forces." His eyes narrowed slightly. "That's a bold accusation, Corporal." Cassidy placed the datapad on the table. "Coordinates, voice logs, your override codes." Crane looked at it, then back at them. For a long, unbearable moment, no one breathed. Then he sighed softly, almost disappointed. "You two really think you've uncovered something the rest of command doesn't know?" Elena frowned. "What are you talking about?" "You think these men are enemies," he said. "They're assets, field stabilization units. We fund them to keep larger powers out of this sector." Cassidy's voice cut like a knife. "You armed the same people who attacked our soldiers." Crane's tone didn't rise. "Collateral damage, necessary chaos. You don't win wars by keeping your hands clean." Elena's jaw tightened. "You win them by keeping your soul." He smiled faintly, pityingly. "That's why you were discharged, Daniels. You never learned the difference between saving lives and wasting potential." She stepped closer, voice low and steady. "I learned the difference between war and murder." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, annoyance, maybe fear. Then he said, "You've seen too much." The guards moved at once. Cassidy grabbed for her weapon, too slow. One guard caught her arm, the other raised his rifle. Elena moved before thought, elbow, pivot, strike. Gunfire exploded inside the tent. Chaos. Shouting. Light. When the smoke cleared, Crane was gone, slipped out through the rear. Cassidy was bleeding, shoulder hit. Elena dragged her down behind cover. "Stay still." Cassidy's breath hitched. "Go, don't let him leave the base." Elena pressed a bandage tight. "I'm not leaving you." Cassidy met her eyes, fierce, pained, unyielding. "That's an order, Corporal." Elena hesitated. Then with a tight nod she stood and ran. The base alarm wailed again. Red lights painted everything in shadow. Crane's vehicle roared to life, heading for the south gate. Elena sprinted through dust and chaos, heart pounding with something that wasn't just anger, it was duty. She reached the final checkpoint just as the gates started to open. The vehicle burst forward. She raised her weapon, fired. The tire exploded. The truck veered, slammed into a barrier. When she approached, the driver's seat was empty. Crane was gone. Only his radio remained, still transmitting, a faint, cold voice on the other end. "Phase 2 confirmed. Proceed with strike." Elena froze. Her stomach turned cold. Strike. This wasn't about corruption anymore. This was about annihilation. She grabbed the radio. "This is Corporal Daniels, FOB Striker. Who is this? What strike?" Silence. Then click. The line went dead. She looked up at the dark horizon, where lightning flashed miles away. It wasn't weather. It was artillery. And it was coming. How fast can war return to you when you never truly left it? The horizon burned red. At first they thought it was sunrise. Then the first shells hit. The shockwave slammed through forward operating base striker like a hammer of fire. Dust metal screams. Elena hit the ground hard, hands over her head as the medical tent ripped apart above her. By the time she stood, the world was chaos. Flames devoured the outer fences. Vehicles burned like pyres. The air was filled with the sickening roar of incoming rounds, the sound she'd sworn she'd never hear again. Major Cassidy's voice crackled through her radio, faint, broken. "Contact. All units defensive." Crane called in artillery. Then static. Elena's breath caught. Crane wasn't running, he was finishing. Phase 2, the strike. She grabbed her med pack and sprinted toward the command sector, ducking under the shattered beams of what had been the infirmary. Everywhere she looked, there were bodies not dead, not yet, just broken and waiting. She forced herself not to think, only to move. "Jackson," she shouted, spotting the private dragging a wounded soldier. He looked up, terrified. "Mortar hit the east line. Rodriguez is down." "Get him to cover," she ordered. "I'll stabilize whoever's still breathing." He nodded and disappeared into the smoke. Elena dropped beside a man with half his leg gone. No time to think. Tourniquet pressure, reassurance. "It's okay, you're here, you're going to make it." Her voice was calm, steady, the way a medic's had to be. Behind her, another explosion tore through the vehicle bay. The ground shook, sand spraying her face. She didn't stop, couldn't. Minutes blurred into seconds. Her hands were slick with blood and sweat. Her lungs burned with smoke. When she reached the central command tent, the roof was half gone, equipment sparking. Cassidy was inside, one arm in a makeshift sling, barking orders through a dying radio. "Alpha, hold the western wall. Bravo, reinforce the supply yard. Where the hell is our counterfire?" Elena burst in, coughing. "Major." Cassidy turned, relief flickered across her face. "You're still breathing." "For now, what's our status?" "Half comms are fried, power grid failing. We can't reach command. I think Crane jammed us before the strike." "He's gone rogue." Cassidy nodded grimly. "You saw what he started, but now we have to survive it." Another shell landed close enough to make their bones rattle. Cassidy winced, leaning against the table. "We hold the line until reinforcements pick up the distress signal. That's all that matters." Elena shook her head. "That's not enough." "What?" "He's not just shelling us. He's silencing us. If we don't stop his transmitters, he'll bury this base and everyone in it before help ever comes." Cassidy hesitated. "You're saying go after him." "I'm saying if we don't, it ends here." The major looked at her, the dust-streaked face, the blood, the eyes that never looked away. Then she nodded slowly. "Take whoever's still mobile. I'll coordinate defense." Elena slung her rifle, voice steady. "Understood." Outside, the base was a vision from hell. Vehicles overturned, ammo boxes burning. Men and women shouting, firing, dragging each other from debris. She found Williams first, bleeding from a cut on his forehead but still firing from behind a barricade. "Williams, you good?" He blinked, shocked to see her alive. "Barely. What's happening?" "Crane's calling the strike from somewhere inside the outer perimeter. We need to find his transmitter." He hesitated, then nodded. "I'm with you." They moved through the wreckage, ducking low, moving fast. Jackson joined them halfway, his hands shaking but eyes fierce. Together, they crossed what was left of the motor pool. The smell was unbearable, burned oil and blood. In the distance, they saw the shimmer of a signal tower, its antenna still flashing faintly in the haze. Elena pointed. "There, that's our origin. If we kill the signal, the strike dies with it." Williams frowned. "That's a 200-meter open run." "Then don't miss." They ran. Gunfire erupted from the far trench, Crane's remaining loyalists, men who'd turned against their own. Elena dove behind a barrier, bullets tearing into the sand. Jackson screamed, hit in the leg. She grabbed him, dragged him behind cover. "Stay down." He gasped, "Go, don't stop for me." She snapped, "Shut up, Private. You're not dying on my watch." Tourniquet pressure, calm, always calm. She looked up at Williams, "Cover me." He nodded and stood, firing bursts toward the trench as she sprinted forward. The ground erupted behind her, dirt, flames, sound. She didn't stop. At the tower base, 2 men guarded the console. She recognized one, Crane's driver. He turned too late. One shot, then another. Silence. Elena reached the panel, breath ragged. The transmitter lights blinked red, cycling. She scanned the controls, encrypted, military grade. She knew enough to break it, barely. Her fingers flew, inputting overrides, bypassing relays. Then she found it, the active uplink. Phase 2 artillery strike, confirmed target lock. She exhaled sharply. No. Her hand slammed the abort sequence. Authorization override, Daniels, Corporal. The console hesitated, then the red lights went dark. The sky fell quiet. For the first time in an hour, the earth stopped shaking. She stood there, chest heaving, the wind pulling at her hair. Williams limped toward her, grinning through blood. "You did it." She shook her head slowly, "Not yet." Because she knew he wasn't gone. Crane never left without finishing. They found him an hour later. North edge of the base. He stood near the wreck of his command vehicle, radio in hand, uniform torn but composed. He didn't run, didn't hide. When Elena approached, he smiled faintly. "You're persistent." She raised her weapon. "Call off your strike, Crane." "It's already over." "Then what's your end game?" He gestured to the burning horizon. "Look around, Daniels. You think command will ever know the truth? You think they'll believe you over a decorated general?" She kept her aim steady. "They won't have to. I've got your voice, your codes, your shipments. It's enough." He took a slow step closer. "You can't win this. The machine will eat the story before it ever breathes." "Maybe," she said quietly, "but someone will remember." He studied her, curious. "You really believe saving them matters, after everything?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "It's all that ever mattered." For a moment they stood in the roar of wind and flame, 2 people shaped by war, both broken, both certain. Then Crane's hand moved, fast, sharp, reaching for his sidearm. Elena fired first. 1 shot. Clean. He fell backward into the dust, expression unreadable. She stood over him for a long time. No satisfaction, no triumph. Just the stillness that comes when something finally ends. Then she picked up his radio, pressed transmit. "Major Cassidy, this is Daniels. Crane's neutralized. The strike is halted, base secure." Static, then Cassidy's voice, weak but alive. "Copy that, Daniels, copy that." The aftermath was slow, painful, endless. Fires burned through the night. Medics moved like ghosts among the wreckage. Elena worked until her body gave out, until her fingers wouldn't close anymore, until her voice cracked from shouting. When the first evac helicopters arrived at dawn, she barely noticed. She was sitting beside Jackson's stretcher, holding pressure on his wound, whispering that he'd be fine. He believed her, because she said it like someone who never lied. Cassidy approached quietly, arm still in a sling, uniform burned. "Command's en route. They know the truth now. We've got your recording." Elena looked up slowly. "That won't bring back the ones we lost." Cassidy sat beside her. "No, but it'll stop the next Crane before he starts." For a moment neither spoke. Then the major said softly, "You should know, when command asked who led the counterstrike, I told them it wasn't me." Elena frowned. "Then who?" Cassidy's gaze held hers. "You, the medic who wouldn't stop." Elena's throat tightened. I just did what needed to be done." Cassidy smiled faintly. That's what leadership is. As the last chopper lifted off, dust swirling around them, Elena stood on the cracked tarmac and watched the wreckage of what had once been her post. Broken tents, shattered gear, blood dried to dust. But she wasn't looking at destruction. She was looking at proof of what humanity looked like when everything else was stripped away. She thought of Berkshire alive, of Jackson still breathing, of Williams leaning on crutches but grinning anyway. And she thought of Crane's final words about the machine, the system, the silence. Maybe he was right. Maybe the story would vanish under classified files and reports. But she knew something else: stories like this didn't die. They traveled. In the way people looked at you afterward. In the quiet respect that replaced the laughter. That night before she boarded her own evacuation flight, she walked to the edge of the perimeter, where the sand met sky. She knelt, picked up a small fragment of scorched metal, part of a crate, marked with her old handwriting. She held it for a long moment, thumb tracing the faded letters. Then she whispered, barely audible, "For the ones I couldn't save, and for the ones I still can." The wind took the words, scattering them into the desert. She stood, eyes steady, the horizon glowing faintly with first light. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And that was what made her dangerous. Not her gun, not her skill, but her refusal to stop saving people, even when the world stopped deserving it. They said the war was over. But for her, it never really ended. Weeks passed since the siege at Stryker. The fires died, the reports were written. And the world, as it always did, moved on. For the survivors, moving on meant different things. For Jackson, it meant rehab, stubborn optimism, and endless jokes about learning to walk again just to annoy the nurses. For Williams, it meant getting his discharge papers and going home to a family that thought he'd been dead for 2 days. For Cassidy, it meant fighting a different kind of war. One waged in front of tribunals and intelligence boards, against men who preferred silence to truth. And for Elena Daniels, it meant being called to testify. The military tribunal room was cold, sterile, and too bright. Long table, too many officers, not enough humanity. She stood at attention in a wrinkled uniform, her left hand bandaged, her right holding her service cap against her chest. A colonel read from a file that felt heavier than it should have been. Corporal Elena Daniels, former field medic, Delta Forward, reactivated under emergency protocol. Actions during the Stryker incident, classified review in progress. She nodded once, expression neutral. It wasn't fear she felt, not anymore. It was something quieter, fatigue. A general across the table, someone she'd never met, looked up. "Corporal, we've reviewed the recovered data. Your actions directly prevented the total destruction of forward base Stryker. Is that correct?" She hesitated. "I acted where I could, sir." He leaned back. "That's modest. The report from Major Cassidy paints a different picture." Elena's pulse slowed. "Sir." "She credits you with neutralizing the compromised command structure, halting the strike sequence, and leading defensive triage under live fire." Her statement reads. He flipped a page. Corporal Daniels demonstrated decisive leadership and personal courage beyond all expectation. Without her, none of us would have survived. Elena blinked hard, looked down. She could still hear Cassidy's voice that night, hoarse, half-broken, refusing to stop shouting orders. The general continued, "The tribunal finds your actions to be consistent with the highest traditions of service and medical duty. You will be reinstated with commendation." A pause, papers shuffled. Then quieter. "There is also the matter of General Crane." Elena's stomach tightened. The colonel spoke now, eyes colder. Officially, his death is recorded as combat engagement. Unofficially. He paused. Your testimony confirms he was the source of the compromised shipments and unauthorized strike. She nodded once. Confirmed, sir. The colonel's voice softened, not with kindness, but with something resembling respect. You understand this case won't be public. It will be buried under containment protocol. Elena met his gaze. I expected that. Then why risk everything? She hesitated. The question hung there heavy. Then she said quietly, because somebody had to stop him. The colonel studied her a moment longer, then nodded. No further questions. After the hearing, she walked out into the courtyard. It was raining, soft, steady, like the world was washing itself clean. She didn't run for cover, just stood there, head tilted back, letting the rain soak into her uniform. Cassidy joined her a few minutes later, arm in a sling, expression unreadable. They cleared you. Elena nodded. Commendation, reinstatement, all the words they use when they don't know how to feel. Cassidy exhaled, looking out across the empty field. You did good, Daniels, better than any of us. Elena shook her head. I did what I was trained to do, save lives, that's all. Cassidy smiled faintly. That's not all. You saved the idea that it still means something. For a long moment, neither spoke. Rain drummed against the concrete. Somewhere far off, a flag clattered in the wind. Then Cassidy said, softer, when Crane called that first strike, I thought we were finished. I really did. Her voice broke slightly. And then I heard your voice come over comms, calm, certain, telling me the strike was canceled. You don't forget something like that. Elena's throat tightened. I didn't do it alone. Cassidy nodded. No one ever does, but someone has to start. That night in the barracks, Elena found her old kit bag waiting for her. Inside, folded neatly, was her original field uniform, the one she'd been wearing the day she'd first arrived at Stryker. The name tag still said Tent Girl. She laughed softly. It wasn't mocking, it was memory. She ran her thumb over the stitched letters, tracing the frayed edges. It wasn't anger she felt anymore. It was distance, like looking back at a younger version of herself, fragile and furious and untested. She folded it back into the bag, then paused. Something else was inside, a sealed envelope. She opened it. Inside, a single page, Cassidy's handwriting. For what it's worth, the general said it himself. You saved us all. See? Her breath caught. The words hit harder than she expected. Because for all the medals, the files, the commendations, this was the only thing that felt real. The only truth that mattered. Days later, she was assigned to a rehabilitation wing, not as a patient, but as staff. She didn't argue. She just showed up every morning at 600 hours, scrubbing her hands, checking vitals, talking to the wounded. They came in on stretchers, broken in body and spirit. And she was there for every single one. Sometimes she'd just sit beside a bed, silent, while a soldier tried to remember how to breathe without panic. Sometimes she'd tell stories, small ones, about base life, about sandstorms, about a tent that always leaked no matter how much you patched it. She never talked about Crane or the strike. Some wounds didn't need retelling. But the younger soldiers, the ones who came through bleeding and shaking, they started to talk about her. They said she was the medic who ran into fire, the one who stayed when everyone else ran, the one the general himself said saved them all. Elena never corrected them. She just smiled faintly, cleaned their wounds, and told them they were going to be okay. Because that's what medics do. They don't tell you how bad it is. They show you it's survivable. Months passed. The nightmares didn't. Some nights, she'd wake to the sound of shelling that wasn't real, the ghost of artillery in her head. She'd sit up, hand pressed to her chest, waiting for her heartbeat to slow. In those moments, she'd think about the ones she lost, Chin, Berkshire, Martinez. Their faces stayed with her, softer each time like fading photographs. She'd whisper to them sometimes, not to apologize, just to remember. And maybe in the quiet, she believed they heard her. One afternoon, she walked the perimeter of the hospital courtyard. The sun was sharp, the air clean, almost too peaceful. A group of recruits passed by laughing, loud, unscarred. One of them recognized her from a briefing. "That's her," he whispered, "the tent medic from Stryker, the one who stopped the strike." Elena pretended not to hear. She wasn't interested in legend. Legends were for people who didn't have to live with what they'd done. Still, a part of her, the small, fragile part she thought she'd lost, felt something like warmth. Not pride. Closure. That night she packed her things. No orders, no ceremony. Just a quiet resignation letter and a short note left on Cassidy's desk. Mission complete, going home. No destination listed. No return address. She boarded a civilian transport at dawn. No uniform, no medals. Just a worn jacket and a duffel bag. As the shuttle lifted off, she looked out the small window. The earth rolled beneath her, endless, scarred, and still somehow beautiful. She thought about what Crane said, about the machine swallowing truth. Maybe he was right in part. But she also knew the machine only wins when people stop fighting quietly. And she wasn't done fighting. Not yet. Maybe her war wasn't in the desert anymore. Maybe it was in hospital halls, in the eyes of scared recruits, in the simple act of choosing to care. That was the fight that still mattered. The one that never ended. Years later, long after her name faded from official memory, a new generation of soldiers would arrive at the academy. They'd hear the story in fragments about a medic who stopped a strike, saved her unit, and disappeared after the war. They'd call her the tent girl who wouldn't quit. No one would know where she went. Some said she became a civilian doctor. Some said she joined a rescue team overseas. Some said she walked into a refugee camp and just stayed. No one could prove any of it. But every so often, a letter would arrive at the military hospital, unsigned, sealed in brown paper. Inside, a simple note, handwritten. "Check the morphine stock. Don't let anyone move it without verification." ID. And they always listened. In the end, Elena Daniels didn't need statues, medals, or history books. She didn't need recognition. Because she already knew what mattered, that she'd lived through hell and refused to become it. That she'd saved lives in a place built to destroy them. And that somewhere out there, people were still alive because she refused to stop acting when everyone else froze. Sometimes heroism doesn't roar. It breathes quietly, bandages wounds, and keeps moving forward. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.